Welcome back to Her Birth, Her Story, where we share real birth experiences and empower women to reclaim their birth. I'm Brooke, your host, and today we're going to be chatting with a work-from-home mom of two who chose home birth. You're going to hear how amazingly different those two birth experiences were for her, and she is very passionate about education and just learning the physiological way that our bodies as women are created, and just really stepping into birth with confidence and just trusting the way that God has designed our bodies to birth. Her story is a powerful reminder that when we understand what our bodies are doing, birth can become less about fear and just more about trust. So today we're holding space for her journey as we continue reclaiming birth. You and I connected based on just our passion for birth. So can you go ahead and just give us a little background of what sparked that for you?
Yeah, so actually, I didn't have anybody in my immediate friends or family at the time that had had a home birth or really was like passionate about birth at all. It really started, and I think this happens to most women when you get that first pregnancy test. You feel that weight of responsibility of, I need the best outcome for myself and this baby. And the passion started when I started reading books and I started listening to podcasts like this. And I love reading and learning. And that's how I fight any fear of birth, is just to have as much knowledge as I can, because I find that really makes me feel confident. So it started just from reading books. I did have a friend of a friend who I knew her during pregnancy, and she had a home birth. And that was like my first interaction with someone having a home birth and kind of learning that other side. We really just had this 5-minute conversation. I asked her how her home birth was, and she told me her story. It was great. And that planted a seed in me. So then the following year, when I was pregnant, she was like the first person I reached out to because I wanted her midwife information. I hadn't talked to my family yet. My husband and I just knew. And I called that midwife who I ended up using. And I asked her, I made a consult appointment with her. I asked her if there was any book recommendations I could read at that time. She gave me Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And that book was a great first read. Half is all the things, kind of hospital versus home birth, where, natural birth versus medicated birth, really, and complications and intervention. So it has a lot of great information. And also, the second half is just full of positive home birth stories. And I think when you're starting out, you need to see that, because birth has been so, this modern age, it was so medicalized. Really, over 100 years ago, all women gave birth at home. And so it was this natural thing. I think just seeing there's so many women that have had positive birth stories, and I wanted to start there and really dig into it. And my first pregnancy was at the end of 2021. So really, we had just gone through 2020, which obviously the world was crazy, and I think a lot of us started looking at more holistic health anyway. So long story short, that's kind of where this all started.
The one thing about your story that really just blows my mind, because not many women choose home birth for their first. What led you, besides, what you were just talking about, kind of that seed that was planted, what led you to be confident in your decision of, I'm going to choose home birth for my first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Looking back, I'm really not sure. It was such a huge leap of faith for me, because really I didn't know anybody, in my family, immediate friends that had had a home birth. Yes, again, just reading those books. And because I had a midwife contact, I was able to call her. So I called this midwife. Most midwives will do a free consult appointment where you have an hour to talk to them and just to get to know them. That was wonderful. So I had that with the midwife. Before we were even pregnant, I had seen a home birth video online, and it was a chiropractor I followed at the time. And I just happened to watch her home birth. And so I'm so thankful she put that out there. And it wasn't even like this peaceful, perfect home birth. It was actually a really long birth and a lot of discomfort and a lot of hard work. But that was another seed planted with me. And so at the time, I asked my husband, I said, would you ever consider a home birth? And he said, absolutely not. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're a first time mom, this is your first pregnancy, or maybe you're married and thinking about kids, and that's kind of where your husband is, that doesn't need to be where he stays. His confidence grew with that first midwife appointment, but also as my confidence grew, because at the end of the day, it's me birthing the baby. So when he saw that I was growing in confidence and really excited about it, he jumped on on the train with me. And two, now after our first birth, and he was learning and reading these books with me, he is such a big home birth advocate. At the time, I thought the only way to get an ultrasound was to go to a OB. So I made an appointment at my hometown OB office. And so I had both of these perspectives of these two totally different appointments. I went to that appointment. I knew pretty much that I was going to have a home birth. So, but I went there, acted, like I didn't know what I was talking about. And I had felt very much like a patient there. It was very different from my midwife who got to know me and let me ask her all these questions. I was very much a patient going down a conveyor belt, and they took my blood work. I had like 15 minutes with the midwife at that time. There's midwives in the office, but it's a OB over the whole office. And I'll never forget, she sat me down, and actually my sisters used the same midwife. So that's funny. I have three older sisters. They've all given birth and they use this office. But she said, okay, so for pregnancy, you don't need to change anything about what you're doing, eat the same way, move the same way. And she said, word for word, if you use bleach, just wash your hands afterwards. And at this time, I had already read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, and I was so dumbfounded. I was like, is that really what you're telling women who come through your office? Because at my midwife appointment, with Hannah, my midwife, she put so much emphasis on, getting that 100 grams of protein every day when you're pregnant, movement. I think women, when we get pregnant, we think we need to be so careful, but really we need to keep our bodies moving. And she put emphasis on scripture, which I loved about my midwife, that I love that she can do that. But again, yeah, just movement, eating right. And she handed me this whole folder of everything to be doing. And there's so much gold in that folder. So just the experience between being told, if I'm going to use bleach, wash my hands. And that was pretty much it. So that was a really big determining factor for me on what I chose as well. And even my husband, we left that OB office and he was also just kind of like, really, that's all they're giving to women right now.
That is just so frustrating. When we are pregnant, we are in such a vulnerable state mentally and emotionally, just because the last thing that we want to do as a mom is to do anything that could potentially harm our baby. What fears did you have to overcome to really make that final step of faith into home birth for your first child?
So, what's funny, and this might not relate to most women, I feel like I didn't have a ton of fears because I saw the truth behind birthing very early on. And I had this maternal instinct of, okay, I see what Hollywood's depicting. I have these women in my life who almost all don't have great hospital birth stories. And so I knew something was wrong when I started reading these books. And, I read that first book very early on. I was probably only 4 or 5 weeks pregnant. Those quieted a lot of my fears because I could see the facts in front of me. I could see the statistics. I knew the importance of choosing the right provider for you. And I agree, Brooke. I don't think home birth is necessarily for everybody because there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of preparation. And sometimes there are high risk moms that do need to be at the hospital. But I think women should have all the information to be able to make the best choice for them. And I believe when you are comfortable where you're giving birth, that's going to make your birth experience so much better. If you can be relaxed, if you trust the people taking care of you. So actually, my biggest fear with home birth was actually not having a home birth. I was afraid I was going to be transferred. And that was my fear early on. And I know that's funny. I know that's probably not everybody's story, but my fear was just that I wasn't going to be able to have a home birth. So that's why I wanted to prepare as much as I could, spiritually, mentally, and physically, to make sure that was going to happen for me. Because I think a lot of women do lose their voice when they go into the hospital, and I didn't want that to happen to me.
I'm gonna let you go ahead and tell your first birth story.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, first birth was my son. And this birth was like textbook, peaceful, calm. It was everything I imagined for the most part. And I call it, it was almost pain free. I did get a cervical lip, which I'll talk about later, which was like the painful part. So, I was 37 weeks. I woke up at 4 a.m., walked to the bathroom, and my water broke on the floor, which was so funny. It was like a movie. I just remember staring at it being like, oh, all right. And so with your home birth kit, you get an amniotic fluid swab where you can test the fluid and make sure it is your water. So I got that. I didn't wake up my husband. And it actually wasn't turning blue like it was supposed to. And I was kind of dumbfounded. I just stared and I was like, that has to be my water. So I called my midwife, spoke to her, and then went back to bed. Rested. She said, we'll just see what happens in the morning if you're having contractions. Woke up around 9. I had told my husband in the middle of the night before I went to sleep that my water broke, but he was like delirious and he thought I was joking. So when I woke up at 9, I told him again. Just it was a very like restful morning. We just cleaned the house because we knew, my mom and the midwife, the birth team would be coming over. Got some food ready to be eating throughout labor and for our birth team too. Till my mom got there at 2 p.m. I was still in very like light labor. I think when my mom got there at 2, I remember it picking up a little bit more. Totally manageable, pausing here and there when needed. And I had my worship playlist on that I had created for birth. So just a very peaceful environment. I remember my husband, rubbing my back. So the midwife, she was in contact with us, of course, and I was timing my contractions. I actually don't think I was doing it right. I think I was like not stopping and starting the timer right. So anyway, when she got there at 7 p.m., I didn't have a birth pool liner, which is what you put over your birth pool, and she brought one. I was supposed to be getting that in like a couple of days when I saw them, but I was at 37 weeks. So when they got there, I remember my husband started filling up the birth pool with my mom, and I had my hypnobirthing audio track on repeat. And if you don't know what hypnobirthing is, I love combining hypnobirthing with the Bradley method when I'm laboring. Hypnobirthing, it's positive affirmations that you listen to throughout your whole pregnancy. And it helps you when you listen to it, it's training your body to stay relaxed and, just in that peaceful state. So that was something I had on when my contractions started getting little more intense when I was feeling more pressure. So when my midwife got there around 7, I let her check me and I was at 9, I was dilated to 9 centimeters. So, I got in the birth pool and I actually pushed for almost 2 hours and we're like, okay, I'm not making progress. I think I was kind of in and out of the birth pool. So the midwife checks me again and I had a cervical lip. And so what that is, it's just a small part of the cervix that hasn't fully opened. So it's kind of blocking the baby from being able to come out, a swollen lip per se. So when you have a cervical lip, you need to rest and not push anymore because it can, make it worse. So that was the hardest part of my labor. I'm on the bed, I'm breathing through, you know, when you're in labor, your body when it's ready to push, it's pushing and it's really hard to fight against. And that was the worst part was fighting against that pushing. And that's why I wouldn't say my birth was like completely pain free because I remember it being really intense. Looking at my husband in the eyes, he was like my grounding point at that part. I remember just looking at his eyes and he was breathing with me. He was like touching my forehead to remind me to relax my face. So that was like 40 minutes. I got in the shower at that point too to let the warm water like run over me and we were lifting my belly up to help. And then after that, got back in the birth pool and it was ready to start pushing. I pushed for a while in there too, but the other midwife that was there, she was so sweet, came over to me and said, "Hey, I have a birth stool. Do you want to try the birth stool?" And I was like, "Yeah, whatever is gonna work, get this baby out."
Yeah.
Because, at that time I was feeling ready. I was like, okay, I am ready to like birth this baby. So got on the birth stool and then he was born like, you know, really shortly after that. I wasn't on the birth stool for very long. My husband was sitting behind me and, pulled the baby up to my chest. And that it's such a magical moment, especially for your first birth, home birth or not. You're just like, wow, I did it. I proved myself right that I could have this baby, especially at home, have a great birth. And it was a really sweet moment. Proud to say 4 a.m. is when my water broke. And then I gave birth to him at like around 12:30 a.m. So it was about 20 hours. So it was still a good lengthy, time frame.
I know that you touched on what a cervical lip is. Did it just kind of resolve itself, or did the midwife have to intervene?
So what the midwife did, I think she put some Arnica, Monica, or Montana. It's like a natural ibuprofen, if that's the best way to describe it. She actually put that on my cervix within those 45 minutes of trying to, let it be less inflamed. And that's really all we did. I don't remember her putting me in different positions. It was basically just like, we need to take a break and rest and let this pass.
I love that, especially because, that's not super hands on. And it sounds like your midwife was like pretty calm during it too. And that helped keep you calm, especially with your first, because like I'm sure that maybe you read about a cervical lip and how that might happen to some, but also sometimes since it's not, I feel like, as common, don't really hear about a cervical lip as much.
And I love that part of my story. I love sharing it because you're right. The only time I heard of a cervical lip that I could remember, it was the chiropractor I was going to at the time. I love to have chiropractor care during my pregnancy. The wife works there too, and she had a home birth, and I was talking to her, and she had a cervical lip as well. And that was the first time I had talked about it. And she kind of had the same thing, like they needed just to, rest for a little bit, and then it was totally fine. So again, hearing her story of how it was all fine, it's not an emergency, gave me peace during my own birth.
I just love how, someone else's story helped you to feel empowered. And
Yeah. And when you talk about someone else's story, I love that you started this podcast because other women's stories was like, reading the books was great, but listening to other women's positive birth stories. And also, I watched so many births on YouTube. I was like, so immersed in it. And that again was just more affirmation that, okay, I can do this. And, every birth is different. I wasn't always wanting to watch those peaceful, worship music burst. I wanted to see it all because, some women are kind of loud during birth, some aren't. That noise you make is very primitive and natural. It's actually a tool for birth is to make a really low, like moo sound. That's what you can call it. And it's counteracting with those contractions. And actually, during my first birth, that's what I basically used when I started to feel a lot more pressure was that low, like moo sound that my midwife recommended. And in my head during my first birth, I kind of felt loud to myself, like, because I was hearing that sound. But it's so funny when I watched my home birth videos back that, my mom was there and was taking some videos. I'm like, wow, it really was like peaceful. But when you're in that labor land, you're so immersed within yourself to be focused and to stay relaxed that it can seem, it kind of felt loud to me. But again, when I watch those videos back, I'm like, wow, it was so quiet and dark and
yeah,
awesome. There's just so many different ways it can fold out. And which my second birth we'll get into. I love that it was total night and day from my first birth. And it just shows even like one mom can have totally different births. And they're all beautiful and they're all empowering either way.
let's talk about your second birth since you said they were night and day of each other.
So this second birth, yes, it's night and day from my first birth. I like to call it fast and furious. It was about 2.5 hours of like start to finish. So background that you need to know before I go into the birth story. Um, I was 37 weeks pregnant or maybe 38 and I felt so itchy. My hands and my feet were so itchy. I'd never heard of it. And I did some reading and I was like, there's a saying called, and I might not be pronouncing right, choleostasis you can get during pregnancy. And basically, your liver is not working the way it should be. The bile is building up in your liver and it can make you really itchy. It's not immediate danger for your baby, but there are some risks if it would it would go on. So I had talked to my midwife. I told her my symptoms. We did some blood work and the blood work came back. I'd seen her that Tuesday. We did blood work. It came back Wednesday morning and we jumped on the phone and she didn't tell me this until after my birth, but she's like, those are the highest liver bile, blood work I've ever seen. Another thing that was happening, we actually just had an offer submitted on our house the day before I gave birth. And also our dog was like really sick and eventually was like dying. So that's just backstory because I basically like labored alone. And it's because we didn't realize I was in birth. My midwife wanted me to do a couple things to get labor going. I was doing some walking, I was on the exercise ball, and I got my breast pump out and was using it because that can help, get labor going too. And she wanted me to start doing castor oil, which it was going to be 2 ounces of castor oil every 2 hours. And what this does, castor oil helps stimulate your intestines and it triggers glandins. And it's the same hormone that helps start the uterine contractions. So that's kind of how castor oil works. So when my husband got home at around 5:30, he had picked up castor oil. So I took 2 ounces, was in communication with my midwife, wasn't really feeling anything at all. And then 2 hours later, around 7:30, I took some more. Shortly after that second dose, I started to feel crampy and was using the restroom, which is like a normal sign that it's working. But when I talked to my midwife, she told me, "Hey, this castor oil, it might be getting things moving, but don't expect to give birth tonight. Really, I'm probably going to come over in the morning. I'll give you some herbs and we'll go from there. You will feel castor oil cramping. So you'll feel a lot of cramping with this castor oil, but again, most moms don't give birth, that night. So just be prepared." I was like, okay. So that's what I had in my head. So 9:30 started feeling, I was supposed to take another 2 ounces of castor oil. I was feeling really intense cramping. And I remember, kind of being like leaning on furniture. I'm like, wow, that doesn't feel like my first birth. And I think that's the castor oil doing that. So I remember texting my midwife and I was like, hey, I'm in some pain. I don't think I can take this other 2 ounces of castor oil. So left it at that. I don't remember if she probably texted back. I don't remember what she said, but I was like, I'm not going to take any more for right now. Cause I was thinking I'm going to need to go to sleep tonight. That way I can give birth tomorrow morning. I mean, like tomorrow.
Yeah.
So from 9:30 to 10:30, I was actually in full active labor by myself. My husband was upstairs. He was going through like all of our finances for buying this house and getting paperwork. And he's 1099. So there's just a lot more paperwork you need. And he was taking care of like our really sick dog. So I'm laboring. It's very intense and I'm making a lot of noise. And our 2-year-old, we lived in a small rental house at the time. He's in his room, but I kept waking him up because I was making that like really instinctive sound to help like counteract these contractions. So my husband kept coming in. Don't judge him. Great husband. He kept coming in and say, Kamryn, you need to be quiet. You're waking up our son. So we give him a hard time for that because I was in active labor and we just didn't know. Thinking back, so they were very intense and more around like 10:30, 11, I actually remember pushing a couple times. I was getting that urge to push, but I was like so confused and I was so focused. Oh, what I need to mention, I didn't have like broken up contractions, which you normally have, what I had in my first birth. From 9:30 until I gave birth, it was like one long contraction. There were like no breaks at all. And that's why it was so intense for me because I was like, when is this gonna, and that's why I thought it was the castor oil. It's like, when is this gonna like give me a couple minute like break? I did have one break. It was I think it was right after my water broke. Around 11:20, my water broke and I called for my husband to come downstairs. And I was like, I either peed myself or my water just broke. He's like, okay, let me go get that swab so we can test it to make sure. So he's upstairs. We have not contacted the midwife. He has not called her at any point up till this point. he couldn't find the swab upstairs in our home birth kit. So we called her trying to like get some help to find it. And she says, so he's upstairs. She goes, Chris, what's that noise? Is that Kamryn downstairs? He said, yeah, she's not having a lot of fun down there with this castor oil. And she goes, let me talk to her. So he brought the phone down to me. I remember swaying like on my hands and knees. I'm on the bed, like going through these contractions. And she's like, hi, Kamryn, what are you feeling right now? I remember not being able to talk for like probably a full minute. And I was like, Hannah, I don't think I can do this much longer. Anytime you hear a laboring mom say that, you know, baby's coming really fast. So Hannah, the midwife, she stayed super calm and was like, okay, I'm on my way. Chris took the phone back and he was like, there's also, it looks like the mucus plug right here too. And she goes, Chris, you're about to have this baby. I'll be there. She was 25 minutes away. She's like, I'll be there as soon as I can. She told us afterwards during the phone call, she was like throwing on her scrubs, loading everything into the car. But of course, she like wanted to stay calm for me, especially. So she told Chris, get Kamryn in the birth pool. And he was like, the birth pool? We don't have the birth pool up. We weren't expecting to have the baby. So she's like, okay, get her in the bathtub. So I remember he walked me into the bathtub. That was 11:30. The midwife got there at 11:50. And, you know, I'm like leaning over the bathtub and I had the thought of like, wow, she seems really rushed. Cause, you know, normally before they have all their stuff set up and especially midwives want to set up like their emergency preparedness stuff just in case they would ever need it. So she was setting that stuff up and then I started pushing. I was like, I need to push. And so that was 11:50. She walked in. She caught our daughter at 11:53. And what's so funny, and I love this about labor, I love talking about this because our son had woken up. My husband's holding our son in the bathroom, you know, watching us. So that was cool. Our son is 2 at the time, got to like experience it. And he wasn't scared. He was like totally calm watching mommy. So my husband said to our midwife, do you see her head yet, Hannah? And Hannah said, the head's already out. And like, that just goes to show you, I think women are so scared of like the head coming out. But when the baby head does come out, there's so much relief. I just remember like finally when I birthed her head out, I was just like, oh, so much relief. I could like finally breathe. And then I, you know, birthed the rest of her and the midwife caught her. And I just remember looking at my husband being like, what just happened? This was so crazy and like unexpected. And our son yelled, baby Romy, which is our daughter's name. Like he knew right away that was her. And so this fast and furious birth, but I love the different perspectives I have between these totally two different births because I don't feel any less empowered for my second birth, maybe even more because, you know, just because it was intense and fast and furious, it was just as empowering as my peaceful, like worship music first birth.
So, since your midwife almost didn't make it to the birth, how did you like stay grounded during that?
I think first and foremost, so when our midwife gives us this folder of all this information, there's a page on there, what to do if the baby arrives before the midwife gets there. So my husband was prepared. He had read that. I had read that, studied it. So I think, again, just that preparation of like, what do you do? And I think a lot of moms who go to the hospital, you know, they're not getting that education, which some moms do have their babies in car where they don't make it to the hospital. So having that education up front, and I'm not a midwife. I'm not saying I was like, I wanted her to be there, but just in case. So I had peace in knowing like it was going to be okay. But I think I was so far in labor land. I was pushing, you know, at 11 o'clock. And I didn't even tell my husband that at the time. I was really just taking it like a minute by minute.
With both of your births, what I kind of feel like a key to both of them has been surrender just to whatever that process is. Obviously, your first one was peaceful, textbook, and then this next one was fast and furious. What does surrender look like or feel like, whether you pick one birth, both births, or just in general? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Surrendering is like the biggest part of birth because we have this picture in our head of what we want it to look like and what it can look like. But at the end of the day, birth has its own plan. And so for both of my births, I needed to surrender to the fact like this could go differently than what I want, which is like the peaceful worship music kind of birth. And so just surrendering to that, trusting your body, trusting, hey, if this baby comes out fast and furious, it's what needed to happen to keep her safe. Same thing, like, so for instance, going into labor at 37 weeks naturally with my first, I didn't have preeclampsia, but I was having some symptoms that um, we were kind of tracking and make sure I needed to eat more protein essentially, and I wasn't. But my body was ready to give birth. And so again, just trusting that what's going to happen is what needs to happen and also preparing spiritually, and just putting your trust in that our bodies were made so perfectly. And, when you learn about birth and you learn what the contractions are doing and you learn how the baby turns right at the last moment as the head comes out, you just realize like it really is this magical miracle, a birth. So just believing in that, trusting your body, doing that prep work in the beginning, that was huge for me. The education, because again, that's going to build confidence in your body. If you don't know what's happening during birth, you can't picture it. And that was huge for me, picturing what the contractions were doing. And that way you don't have to be afraid of it. You can lean into it. That's a huge part of surrender, is just staying relaxed during those contractions because they are working for you. And if you work against them, I believe that's when it gets really uncomfortable for most women.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely agree with that. And just surrendering in all aspects too. It's not just like physically surrendering yourself. Like you have to surrender yourself emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually too. I know that you mentioned some of the resources that you've used. Were there any like other podcasts or more books that really could help the listeners to dive headfirst into knowing how does our body work? What is birth like?
Yeah, for sure. My favorite book. So during my first pregnancy, I read about 15 books. Not every mom needs to do that, but my favorite book is Natural Childbirth, The Bradley Way. I love this book and encourage it to, if someone's going to read one book, this is the book I would recommend, mainly because it's a lot of going into each stage of labor and explaining what's happening. I would encourage your husband to read it too, because my husband, Chris, he was able to stay so relaxed for me. And that was a huge grounding point and anchor to look at him and know everything was okay. Too, in that book, it explains emotional doubt. You reach this point in labor where a woman will start to doubt herself. Like when I said, Hannah, I don't think I can do this much longer. And that means baby's coming so soon. And I think and if a woman doesn't know that and she's in the hospital or even if she's at home and she's like, hey, I can't do this anymore. Give me the epidural, give me whatever you need to do. And maybe that's not what she wanted going into it, but she reached that point of like, I don't think I can do this anymore. So that book goes through all the stages and it's just really in depth. And again, just really great for the husband to read too. That way he can be on the same page. And I think it's scary for husbands because they don't really know anything about birth. And so, of course, we want them to feel confident too, because they're a huge grounding piece for us. So, The Natural Childbirth, The Bradley Way, love that book. Another book I talked about in the beginning, Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, Hypnobirthing audio tracks. There are books on this. You can read them. I read them. The gist is when you listen to this track your entire pregnancy, every night before you go to bed, your body learns how to relax to it. And the one I listened to, it was Christian based. It's called Christian Hypnobirthing. You can download it on your iPhone for free. And there's a free track on there called Positive Affirmations. And that track is so wonderful. Every night you listen to it and it's speaking life over you as a mom and just saying like, I'm strong, I'm brave, that kind of thing. So that's what I listened to during my whole first labor. And that really grounded me as well, just hearing that over and over again and really helps me stay relaxed. Any mom, before you give birth, whether hospital with epidural, natural hospital, home birth, you have these fears that creep up of like, man, can I do this? So that constant positive affirmation of you can do this and you were built to give birth.
How did you preparing yourself with knowledge help combat fear throughout your pregnancy or your birth and even postpartum?
It helped me so much because at the end of the day, I could look at the stats. If I ever had that fear creep up, I specifically wanted a home birth, but sometimes I'd be like, am I making the right choice? Especially because no one in my immediate family had done it. So of course I'm getting feedback from them. And actually a little tidbit, I think I remember my midwife recommending this too. I didn't go around for my first pregnancy telling everybody I was having a home birth, posting it. I really guarded myself because I didn't want that negative feedback because that was going to grow fear inside of me. My husband and I, we were, if somebody straight up asked me, I would tell them, but I was very careful about it because, again, I was guarding my heart and my mind, and I didn't need other than, I had my own little fears that would pop up here and there. And I knew I didn't need anybody's like traumatic birth story in the back of my head or anything like that. So that would be a big piece to like first time moms too, is just to like guard your heart about it. So again, those affirmations of being able to hear myself tell myself I could do it and just being careful who I listen to. I wanted to listen to my midwife. I worked at a big children's hospital at the time of my first pregnancy. So I knew there were really big, probably opinions in my office. So again, I guarded my heart towards it. And I didn't want anybody speaking anything over me that I didn't want to happen.
I think a lot of times, too, with birth in general, fear is what keeps a lot of women, too, from experiencing what their hope is for birth because what you don't know, you just don't know. And if you're not taking the initiative or nobody's helping you to learn what it can be or how the process works, that's why I'm really big into, reading the books, listening to the podcasts, and asking questions because that can just change your whole experience.
Yeah. And something I'll add to that. My sister, who I'm very close with, we're 18 months apart. She was actually pregnant when I was pregnant. Our sons are only a month apart. She gave birth in the hospital, did the epidural. They actually induced her. But, I was doing all this reading and learning, and she was scared and kinda had that Hollywood, like, chaotic bursting in her head, so she didn't wanna, like, read anything. I remember, like, giving her a book, and looking back, she would say, you know, I was just nervous. I just wanted to go in and whatever was, the baby was in, it had to come out. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And I think a lot of women have that too. They're just nervous. We've kind of been fed this lie that birth is scary. But I promise when you do the reading and when you learn what's happening and watch a video of like what's happening during those contractions, and you're like, wow, okay, this really, like, I really don't need all these interventions. I need to just be left alone and let my body do what it needs to do. And then if I need help, someone can step in and help me.
Earlier, you had mentioned when you were talking about your first about why you chose home birth and how the midwife was just so supportive. How did that continue throughout, both of your pregnancies and your births and from the first time you met her until postpartum here recently with your second?
The midwife experience is so cool. So my midwife, I actually go to her house and we sit like in her midwife room, and 60 minutes, that's incredible. That's a really long time with somebody to get to know them. And I remember the first couple of appointments, we did a lot of like small talk. And that was so weird to me because I was so used to the typical like doctor walks in 15 minutes and is out. And I remember thinking through that and I was like, that's the whole point. The whole point is to have small talk and get to know each other because this is like one of the biggest life events ever, to give birth. So to be comfortable and to like know her. And I mean, just really incredible. Like my second pregnancy, when I went in, we hugged and, I was just like excited to see her again because she really was a friend. And it's good to also, if you have a couple midwives in your area that are local, you could choose from, do a consult with all of them. See who you click with, because it's not even just about, obviously, you want the best midwife there. That's priority, but you also want one that you like talking to and you like, you can be friends with. all my reading, I had questions and you're just really blown away. All these questions you can ask this midwife when you meet them at first. And these fears that you have. I remember I asked her the very common question. I was like, what do you do if the cord's around the baby's neck? And she was just so calm and peaceful. And she's like, that's actually really common. And it's very rarely ever an issue. We just slip it off. And both of my births, she had to slip the cord off the neck, and when you watch the video you almost miss it because she just does it so fast. Just getting that time with her to sit, to have small talk, to have her hear me out, and especially postpartum, she asked me, how are you feeling? She wants to make sure her moms aren't having the baby blues. And what's really cool about home birth too is those first, so after you give birth, they come back when my midwife comes back 24 hours later to my home. So I'm in my pajamas, I'm holding my new baby. She's talking to me, making sure I'm okay, checking baby. And then she comes back another time. I think it's like 3 days later or a couple days later, still to my home, the comfort of my home. And that's really special to not having to be like taking your newborn out of the house. So I love that part of midwifery care as well. So yeah, it's really special.
I just love how with the home birth experience, the midwives are literally caring for you through every single stage. They don't just leave you out to dry. Even after 6 weeks, if you had a question, you could still reach out to them and they're still going to help you and love you through that too if there was something else that popped up.
I've had women in my life who have the postpartum preeclampsia symptoms and they don't even know to like look out for that because it's not something they're being told with their care. So I love how preventative midwifery care is. The difference between the two systems. And again, I don't like to like say bad things about like the modern, OB because I know there are good ones, but just how proactive it is. Everything in midwifery is proactive. It's, hey, you're going to eat these 100 grams of protein to help prevent preeclampsia. You're going to keep your body moving. That way, you're going to have a really good birth and be strong for birth. It's kind of like training for a marathon for birth. You want to be strong. You don't want to just, not have any movement and get tight. But anyway, very proactive. And I think a lot of our medical care is reactive in our modern day. And so I love seeing that with my midwife, how preventative she was in explaining to me, if this happens, we do this. If your blood pressure is high after you give birth, I need to know that and different things to look out for. So women in my life who, they're texting me or they're texting, friends of friends, like, hey, I'm having these symptoms, and they just honestly don't know. And with a midwife, if something happens before or after birth, I call her or I text her. I've noticed specifically my sisters who use the OB office, they're like, do I go to the emergency room? What do I do? And me, I'm like, well, can't you just call your OB and talk to her? But that's not necessarily always the line of, they don't always have that direct access to their provider like you would with a midwife.
Since you had a peaceful birth and a fast and furious, what did that teach you about the range and just the beauty of birth?
It taught me, of course, birth has its own plan and surrender to it. Trust your body. Before my first birth, and maybe even after, I maybe had this thought that, birth can be pain free and maybe it should be. And my second birth really humbled me to let me know, even if it's intense, and I don't like to use the word pain usually because really it's just like discomfort. With birth, there shouldn't be any like sharp pains. It's just a lot of pressure, but it taught me birth doesn't have to be pain free. So maybe if that's making you nervous before your birth, where man, like all these women are having these pain free, peaceful births, am I capable of that? It does not have to be that way to be beautiful, to be really empowering. That second birth was just as empowering as my first. And I love that. I mean, I felt like a rock star. I labored alone for 2.5 hours by myself. That's really cool. So I just want women to feel empowered, to feel strong, and to be really proud of themselves. And that feeling of when you pull your baby up after you give birth and you're like, I did it. There's no feeling like that.
What would you tell a mom who feels drawn to home birth but is just nervous to commit because she's more worried about what could go wrong instead of what could go right.
Yeah, I would tell her, guard your heart in this season of your life. Don't let, I feel like we always have those like crazy aunts in our life. They're like, oh, my story. You're allowed to tell somebody like in a nice way. Like, you shouldn't tell your aunt to shut up.
Yeah.
It's funny. So a lot of all of my closest friends after me have had home births. So obviously I've had these conversations with them. I would just say, I feel like my whole thing is just the education part. Just know your options. Have that consult appointment with the midwife. Even if you're leaning more towards hospital birth, have a consult with your midwife. Again, mine was free. I don't know if everyone's free, but that's a really great option just to get that different perspective that I had of an OB office versus midwifery care. Trust your body. Trust that you were designed to dilate, and that baby is so cool. That baby knows what it's doing in your womb. When you watch birth videos, when you see what that baby's doing, it knows to turn its shoulders like as it's coming out. It's really incredible. So again, just education. Read a book or listen to audios. If you're not a big book reader, I know not everybody is. Listen to an audiobook or listen to podcasts like this where, I'm just your everyday mom. I'm not superwoman. I'm just a woman who got pregnant with my first baby, realized I had a lot to learn, and I dove in. And what was really cool too, I forgot to mention this. Once I was pregnant, I was like halfway through my pregnancy, and I started to realize there were women in my life, I just didn't realize it, who had had natural births. Once I started talking to, more people, there's more people around you than you would probably think that have had natural births and have really great positive stories. Fortunately, the bad ones can be louder. Usually what causes that is the intervention, because the more intervention you're going to have, it increase the risk. So I hear stories from moms where they went into the hospital, these sweet first time moms, they go into the hospital, and Brooke, you said it perfectly. Your biggest instinct is to protect your baby, and you're going to do whatever you have to do to make sure you and your baby are healthy and perfect. So if a doctor's telling you, hey, your labor is taking a long time, I think the baby's too big, we need to do an emergency C-section. And then, they have an emergency C-section and the baby's 7 pounds. And really what that baby needed was different positioning to help get into a better position. So just the difference of having support and avoiding all of that intervention. And that just comes with education. So again, I go back to the books, the podcasts, the videos, and just being educated. That way you can have a voice and knowing you're making the best decisions for yourself.
Okay, so I ask every mom that comes on to our podcast here a specific question. And so if you could speak one piece of empowering wisdom into the hearts of the mothers listening, what would it be?
You are capable. You were designed for this. You are so powerful as a woman. You're given these God given instincts to do what you need to do for your baby and lean into that. Shut out the noise, shut out anything you need to, and just really come to terms with that. And the preparation and having that support that you trust makes all of the difference.
Yes, that is so good. Thank you so much, Kamryn, for coming on Her Birth, Her Story. And thanks for empowering all of the mothers that are listening.
Thank you, Brooke. It was an honor to be here.
Wow, what a story from Kamryn. Her passion for physiological birth and just educating yourself on how our bodies were designed to birth and just being able to transform that fear into confidence was just so powerful. And when we educate ourselves and just trust the way that God designed our bodies to labor and birth, we just create this space for deeper peace and deeper empowerment. I just think it's so amazing how she had 2 home births but two very different, unique, and empowering stories. And I just think that that goes to show us how unique birth can truly be. So if today's conversation encouraged you to learn more about your body or your options for birthing, let that curiosity just be a tool for reclaiming your experience, because I truly believe that education is power. Thank you so much for listening to Her Birth, Her Story. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a mom who needs to hear it. And don't forget to follow, share, like, rate, and review the show, because it helps these stories reach more women. And just remember, no matter how you give birth, this is your body, your baby, and your birth, and your intuition matters. We are reclaiming birth one story at a time.